field number 2. Not gonna lie, it's way more fun sampling, way easier on the trucks when the fields are not cultivated, especially on a dry year. It can get pretty lumpy. One of the tricks that we do when it is lumpy is we will stop at near a spot, but then at the last second turn the wheel a little bit until we are directly above the track. So it would be the passenger, if I'm turning right, it would be the passenger track. So what that does is that just helps pack down the field a little bit back more to what it would have been normally. Because if you don't do that, you get these lumps that are 2, 3, 4 inches. And what happens is if you turn that lump over and then you're sampling right beside where it used to be, well, you're not going to get that true 0 to 6. You might get a 1 to 7, a 2 to 8, a 3 to 9 kind of an idea. But because all of your fertilizer and a lot of your plant material is all in the topsoil, that's the top 3 inches is more concentrated than the rest. So we definitely want to make sure that we get that top 3 inches in our sampling. If we were to sample a 2 to 8, we would get a much more diluted sample or a much less concentrated topsoil. That it would come back a lot lower than it actually is. Looking at this double 2 gives us a much better lay of the land. Like here, we are just crossing over. We're on a bit of a ridge. So these ridges exist all over the place, and they've been there for 50, 60 plus years, right? These are field edges, old fence lines. Back in the day when a quarter section might have been 10, 11, 12 different fields, and they were all split up any which way often. Well, I shouldn't say they were split up any which way. You look at some pictures from, and you can find these pictures if you've ever been to the Air Photo Library in Manitoba Conservation. They have images like aerial photography going back to the 1900s. You can really start, it's interesting to see all the old yard sites, how all the fields were split up. Often there was reason to how they split it up. It had to do with the lay of the land, the ridges, the soil texture, etc., etc. It was just really interesting to see, and you can lay modern satellite imagery, NDVI imagery that measures the biomass of the plants. You lay that over top of these old images, and often those old fence rows, they all line up because those fence rows weren't cultivated. They had tall grass. When you had a lot of erosion back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it would all catch in that grass, pile up, and you'd have topsoil 2 or 3. To this day, you still have topsoil 2 or 3 or 4 feet thick in those old fence rows. If you look at the color of this topsoil or this soil here, it's a pretty developed profile. It's not completely black. There's some black topsoil that's high in organic matter. But the correlation, there's a strong correlation between the color of the soil and the amount of organic matter. The blacker it is, the more organic matter there is in the soil. So one of the things that I always thought would be neat to measure in a soil sampler is topsoil depth. I had 2 ideas actually. We could set it up to have an attribute that we could enter in topsoil depth if we had a lot of variability. That could go a long way in explaining, especially in zone sampling, why certain areas are better producing than others. Oftentimes, it's a deeper profile or a more developed topsoil. So that is just one of the things. The other thing is the soil color, soil texture, etc. The other thought that I have was, why hasn't somebody invented a pressure gauge or the sending unit that would tie into the tablet, whether it's Bluetooth or whatever, that would measure the amount of pressure as you're pushing the soil probe into the ground? I'm wondering if we could set it up to use it as an effective method for measuring soil compaction. The more the pressure, the more the compaction, the harder it is the soil, the more it's trying to push through. These are all just random musings from hours and hours and hours spent in the soil sampler, listening to podcasts and looking at things and wondering why some areas are completely different than other areas. They look the same. And that's something too, going back to the old aerial photography and the way the fields used to be. Oftentimes we'll ask a younger farmer, you know, what are all these lines in the field where the biomass, and you know, it says these areas are much richer than other areas. The farmer will say, that's a good question, I don't know. And to them, they say, that isn't my field, or I can't explain it. My field is tabletop as far as I know. But then dad or grandpa walks in and you show them the same picture and they start to jog in their memory and saying, oh yeah, this used to be a piece, this was a piece, this was a paddock that blew really bad in the 30s, this guy farmed this piece, we bought that one later, never was the same, so on and so forth. So it's really neat, and that history is all part of explaining the variability that we see in fields today. Question of the day, question of the year, is it gonna rain? So as you can see on my map, we have the satellite image, which shows us kind of, it's an image from springtime. We can see kind of where the water was sitting and washed all of the crop residue aside. These are these black areas we see along the borders. We see that there are some pockets, low-lying areas, and some ridges. But this is one of the biggest things that I think has been a benefit to soil sampling, is having these kind of maps in the cab and seeing where you are on the map, because now it's no longer a question. Back in the day, we used to make zigzag patterns across the field and we kind of judging, okay, I think this is the other side of the field and whatever, and next thing you know, doing your zigzags, you end up right near where you took a point already and you say, maybe my judgment is not that good. But fast forward to today, now we've got these beautiful maps. We see where we are on the field with the GPS. So now we can space our points out a lot better in the field, avoiding problem areas like low-lying depressions, ditches, you know, the ridges. We like to log our points. Whenever we're in the field, we make a new set of points, or we log a set of points, even if we'll have the old points in the background because we want a benchmark sample, or we want to have a fairly close representation or similar results, so that we can track what nutrient levels are doing over time. There's so much variability in a field that you know, if you're always taking different points, potentially you're sampling different areas, it becomes very hard to track year after year what your nutrient or your averages are doing. So we always like to sample the same points year after year, or reasonably close to the same points. Reason I say reasonably close is we don't want to be right on top of last year's points, because after 4 or 5 years, you end up with a soil that looks like Swiss cheese, right? You're changing the soil, it's letting more water in, more topsoil. So that piece of soil, if you're only always sampling inside the same square foot or two, those properties are going to change after 5, 6, 7 years of doing it. So we want to be, you know, within 10, 15 feet. The GPS that we're using is just a WAS GPS, or a WAS signal, so where its accuracy is probably, you know, 5 to 10 feet. So we're always in the same-ish general areas, but the key is starting with the correct points to begin with. Sometimes they make no sense and we have to start over, but generally, because we can see where we're putting the points, we have confidence that we're spreading them out throughout the field. We're avoiding problem areas like the old fence rows, the old corners. When we used to plant with diskers, we'd always redo the corners to get rid of extra fertilizer. So those are all areas that we typically would want to stay out of. When we're sampling, we try to aim on a typical quarter section to have a point every 10 acres or so. That gives us a pretty decent average. That would be a minimum by the old standards, but because we can space our points out a little bit better, I think we're doing a better job that way. When we sample, we try not to sample directly in the seed row because we don't want to catch, there's usually concentrated fertilizer there, especially on a dry year where the kernels might not all completely dissolve. So we're always going more so between the rows, again trying to avoid any kind of roots or plant material. You can see these subsoils here, they're pretty crumbly, they're pretty dry, so we're definitely going to need some recharge up here. This year, the way the rainfall fell, the further south you went, the nicer the rains were. As you came north, and especially north of Winnipeg, it just was less and less and less rain. You can see that we have our Antara Ag Weather Network, and you can draw a line probably around Morris, Manitoba, Highway 23. Anything south of there was pretty decent. As you came north from there, it was less. And then the next line would be the 305 in line with Runkill, St. Agathe. There it's even less north of that, all the way to Winnipeg. And north of Winnipeg, it was even drier. I was up in Stonewall looking at some fields this summer, and I couldn't even stick a hand probe in the ground. It was so dry. They wouldn't want to go in more than 3 inches. Okay, so this is the first one. You can see that there's movement in the probe. That means we don't have a full probe, and generally you can, after doing so many fields, you get a feel for it that you know that you're a little bit light. So it's just a hole that's smaller than the diameter of the pipe itself. 9 times or 8 times out of 10, the soil will break off at the probe tip. But every once in a while, especially on a wet year, you'll push the probe down to 2 feet and then you'll start pulling up, but the core stays where it is, attached to the ground. So your probe, sometimes you could end up with nothing, but often you'll get half to 3/4 of a probe. In those cases, we tried to take another sample and try to get a full probe. That way we're getting a proper representation of the soil profile. We don't want to have half of them only 12 inches, half of them down to 24, because that's going to give us oddball results. We want to try to get at least a full 22 to 24 inches every time. Take the 0 to 6 bag, tie it off, put it in the 6 to 24 inch bag. Now both samples stay together. They arrive to the lab at the same time in the same bag. Less work at the lab trying to figure out what goes with what. If you like this content, there's chances are that you know others that will like it too. Do us a favor, please share, like, and subscribe. Check out our other socials for more great content. I'm Bernal Sabrin with Antara Agronomy. Thank you for watching.